St. Mark's Private School was allegedly haunted since the Civil War. Many of the students and even some of the teachers had seen and heard strange things, whether inside the school during the school hours or even outside after close. This had gathered the attention of many people, including those not in attendance at the school. Many private companies and even a couple of television networks had offered to pay money to come and investigate the school after hours. The principal, Walter Hayward, being a devout leader in both the scholastic and religious departments, had tried his best to snuff any claims of the school being haunted by spirits. At first, he tried to simply ignore the claims and let the rumors die down. Things began to get out of hand when multiple break-ins would occur, causing him to hire on-campus security for after hours. Nothing would be stolen, and aside from maybe a door or a window, nothing would be broken or vandalized. He then put into effect high punishments for those caught on school grounds trying to conduct any type of paranormal investigation. The campus was located on a plot of land that backed against thick woods. Many speculated that somewhere in the forest behind the school was a graveyard or some type of burial ground. No evidence supported this claim, but many people have tried to make sense of the school's high paranormal activity. The high school, despite being very old, was actually quite large. A big portion of the size came from later renovations from generous donors, making St. Mark's the second largest private school in the state. Jason and Matt were both seniors, attending the school with hopes of attending college to become film directors. They would make low-budget films and enter into contests around the state and would often win. They had eventually won enough prize money to purchase a decent camera, along other equipment to make pretty decent content. A studio producer caught wind that not only these two attended the highly coveted private high school, but they were also able to film high-quality content footage, and an idea came into place. Matt looked at his phone and saw that Jason was calling him at 11 o'clock at night. Matt hit the ignore button and rolled over, seeing that he had to get up early for swim team. Matt's phone rang again, with the same contact revealing that Jason was calling. Matt answered. "What does this clown want?" Matt grumbled under his breath. "Bro, you're not going to believe the offer I just got." Matt was disoriented from just waking up and now from the screaming. "Dude, I don't care. I have to wake up at 5 tomorrow. The Travel Channel just offered me 10 grand to stay the night at the school and conduct a paranormal investigation." Matt was unfazed by this. "Okay, that's definitely not a scam. Good for you." Matt was about to hang up the phone when Jason piped in. "You know that I want you in on this. I'll split it with you 50-50, an easy 5 grand. Plus, you told me yourself that you don't believe in ghosts anyways." The realization began to sit in with Matt. Wait, 5 grand for one night's work? Before Matt got too excited, he remembered that the school had now had security that would walk the halls to make sure that no one did exactly this. "Jason, if we get caught, we won't get to walk at graduation. Principal Hayward's been so uptight about this kind of stuff all year." Jason laughed. "We're not going to get caught. I have a perfect plan. Thursday, we hide in the gym after school. Security will inspect the school and lock up, and we spend the night investigating. The next morning, we'll go to class like nothing happened. It'll work." The two then made plans of how the night would go. At first, they'd walk around the school to see which area got the most activity. From there, they'd conduct a Ouija board session to see if they could communicate with any spirits. Then, to cap it all off, they'd both go their own way to investigate to cover more ground. They then would find a room in which they'd stay for the rest of the night and get ready for school the next day. It was a high-risk, high-reward situation. Worst-case scenario, if they got caught, they then just wouldn't walk at graduation, but would still be able to get a huge payoff. The next day, the two got their filming equipment ready and loaded up in their cars and drove to school. They also made sure to bring a change of clothes to give the effect that they went home and changed. That Thursday dragged on like every other day, but more so. Matt and Jason scouted the school and made mental notes of areas to investigate throughout the school day. Eventually, the end of the day came, and Matt waited in the locker room waiting for Jason to arrive with the rest of the equipment. To his surprise, Jason walks in with his girlfriend, Clara, who was holding half of the equipment. Matt and Clara have been at odds since she and Jason had started dating that year. Matt immediately began to protest. "Whoa, dude, you didn't say anything about bringing your girlfriend. She's gonna get us caught." "Oh please, Matt, you just don't want me here." The two began to fight when Jason stepped in. "Look, Clara has experience in conducting paranormal investigations, and she has special equipment to talk to spirits. Plus, I promised her my half of the cut, not yours, so you're still gonna get your fair share." Clara and Matt shared a tense moment before they went about their own ways to get prepped for tonight's investigation. "Alright, so here's the deal. We have to be careful in our investigation, mainly because the school hires security to come every couple of hours to make sure people aren't ghost hunting, like us. Let's make sure not to be too loud, and when we hear the guards coming, we turn off our lights and find a good hiding spot," Matt said, making sure everyone was on the same page. Jason and Clara nodded. Jason checked his watch. "Okay, it's 5 o'clock now. Most teachers and even the janitor should be wrapping up on their day's work. We'll come out of here at 6 and check the school to make sure that everyone left." The 3 students played on their phones for the next hour when Jason's alarm went off on his phone. They all shared a glance, as if to see who would go out and check to see if all the teachers had left. Matt decided to go check the school, feeling awkward that Clara was being there. Matt slowly exited the locker room and made his way into the dark gymnasium. The dark hollow gym was much different now than during school hours. The normal busy gym was now filled with shadows and suspense. Matt felt incredibly uneasy, especially since he wasn't supposed to be there. He tried his best to silently cross the wooden floor of the gym, but the silence made his footsteps echo louder than they would normally. He made his way across the gym and finally into the main portion of the school. He peeked his head out of the door and made sure both ends of the halls had no lights on, save it be the emergency lights and the glowing exit sign on both ends. Teachers seemed to be gone. I wonder about the janitor, Matt whispered to himself. Matt entered the hallway and closed the gym door as quietly as the door would let him. Matt then sped walked down the hall, peering into each classroom on the way to make sure that the school was truly empty. The school seemed much bigger, especially now that he had to peer into each classroom. Matt turned the corner of the long hallway and stopped in his tracks. About 4 classrooms away, one of the classroom doors was opened and the light spilled out into the hall. Matt froze and held his breath. Before Matt could turn around and walk back, the light to the room turned off. Matt expected a teacher or a janitor to exit the room, but no one did. Seconds turned into minutes when Matt realized no one was going to exit the room. Did Matt already see paranormal activity? Matt inched closer to the room, half expecting an exhausted teacher to come out, but they never did. Matt finally reached the doorway and peered inside. The only light inside the room was from a lamppost that glowed from the back of the school's courtyard, next to the woods. The room was empty, but something caught his eye outside. Outside under the lamppost, standing in the school's courtyard, was a man. His features were obscured by the distance and the harsh angle of the light, making Matt feel uneasy. Before Matt could process what this meant, the figure walked into the dark woods behind him. "What was that?" Matt whispered. Matt pressed on, making sure that the facility was empty, before he started his investigation. The thought of the strange man outside seemed weird. Why was he there? Was he able to see me, or was he just passing by and just happened to look in my direction? Thankfully, he wouldn't have to worry about this weird man as long as he stayed inside. Matt checked the rest of the building and called it good. The school had 2 other detached buildings on campus, and one currently under construction, but they would just focus the investigation on the main building. Matt returned to the locker room and informed the 2 that the school was now clear, but Matt didn't mention anything about the man outside, in fear that it would cause concern for the investigation. The group got their equipment ready and exited the locker room, ready to investigate. The school was empty but was filled with shadows. Some of the classrooms were open while others were closed and locked. Where do we begin? Clara asked. Matt and Jason looked at each other and realized that they were ready to investigate. I guess let's go room to room to see if we can capture anything. The group started the investigation in the front office, where the principal's office and the teacher's lounge was. They kept the lights off to prevent anyone from seeing them from the street and used flashlights. The principal's office was locked, so the group tried the teacher's lounge. The door had been locked, but not closed all the way. Matt and Jason pushed on the door and it swung open. The lounge was a room that neither of them had been in before. It was hard to get a good feel for the room since they only had flashlights. Claire set up a Ouija board in the middle of the floor and started to light candles, while the two guys looked around. Jason found a ring of keys in one of the drawers that looked to have every room key to the school. He picked up the heavy ring of keys and put them in his backpack for later. Remember, we need to put these back before school starts tomorrow, Jason said to Matt. Matt and Jason continued to search the room and stumbled across a very peculiar door. In the corner of the teacher's lounge was an old metal red door with a sign that said, Danger, Maintenance Corridor, Do Not Enter. Jason and Matt looked at each other and at the door and began to ponder. Should we check this out? We will never get another chance to investigate. Jason got the large ring of keys out and began trying to find the right one to open the door. Clara had begun a Ouija session and started asking questions to nearby spirits. Jason finally found the key to the door and unlocked it. To his surprise, the door didn't lead to outside or to some miscellaneous back room, but rather a set of stairs that led downwards. Matt shined his flashlight down the stairs, but it didn't reach the bottom. The stairs were old and wooden, and the walls were made out of old stone. Wires hung from the walls and ceilings in the stairwell, but no lights were installed. Guys, come here. We have to check this out, Jason said with extreme excitement. The group walked over and looked into the stairwell with mixed reactions. Matt smiled and nodded, but Clara felt something way off about this place. Oh, there's got to be some ghosts down there for sure, Matt said while grabbing Jason on the shoulder. Matt stepped on the old wooden stairs and the wooden frame began to creak. One at a time on the stairs, Matt said while descending into the darkness below. Clara grabbed Jason and whispered, Jason, I'm getting weird vibes about this. I've never felt this type of evil before. Jason was preoccupied with getting his camera ready. That's good, right? Hopefully we can capture it on camera. Jason followed down the stairs once he couldn't see Matt. Clara waited at the top of the stairs, debating on whether to follow Matt and her boyfriend. She waited as Jason disappeared below into the darkness until she couldn't see his flashlight anymore. Meanwhile, in the teacher's lounge, Clara waited for either Matt or Jason to reappear, but they never did. A couple of minutes passed and she began to feel paranoid in the dark teacher's lounge, all by herself. Jason? Matt? She called down into the dark stairwell, but no answer. She planned on waiting at the top of the stairs for either the boys to reappear, but that plan was thrown out the window when a light in the hallway turned on. Standing on the other side of the door was an outline of a figure. It was either a security guard coming to check the school or a shadow person. Either way, she wasn't going to wait around to find out. Clara quickly gathered her things and pushed them under the couch in the lounge and went down the stairs while closing the door behind her. She could hear the teacher's lounge door open on the other side. Light from under the door shined briefly and went away as the sounds of footsteps left the lounge. Clara held her breath to make sure whoever or whatever it was that had entered the lounge didn't know of her presence. She waited for a few minutes in the dark for good measure before trying the door again. To her shock, the door was locked. She tried frantically to push on the door, but the door latch must have locked her in by mistake. Panic began to set in when she realized that Jason had all the keys. Surely he'd be able to get them out of there. Clara turned on her flashlight and turned around to see the numerous stairs leading into the darkness. Nothing worth value could possibly be down below, except for her boyfriend and the prospect of escape. She began to descend the stairs with the same creaking and groans she heard before. the temperature began to drastically change the further down she went. The stairs seemed to go on way past her expectations that any basement to any building she'd ever been in. She finally reached the bottom, and to her dismay, she did not find Matt or Jason. What she did find was what seemed to be an intersection of multiple tunnels. That's not what made her so fearful. Either by design or by some nefarious neglect, one of the flashlights was on the ground and leading into one of the tunnels. Clara left the light on the ground and made her way into the tunnel in hopes to either finding Jason or Matt. "Jason! Matt!" she cried as she walked into the tunnels, in hope of finding anyone to get her out of here. The tunnel was dark but echoed every sound Clara made, causing her to be more frightened than she already was. Shuffling could be heard in the distance, which caused her to speed up in hopes of finding one of the boys. "Jason! Matt!" she screamed, the sound echoing down the long tunnel in hopes of one of them hearing it, causing them to turn around. The shuffling up ahead had stopped. Someone had heard her. She continued, but now something was off. To her surprise, no one responded, but rather, it was as if whoever was making the noise stopped in order to conceal themselves rather than to make their presence known. The thought finally dawned on her. What if Jason and Matt weren't the only ones down here? Clara stopped in her tracks and turned off her flashlight. She waited in the darkness, trying her best to muffle her heavy breathing that was now on the verge of crying. Her eyes strained in the darkness, trying her best to adjust to her surroundings without giving away her position. Up ahead, she could barely make out a glow of a light that moved against the wall of the tunnel. She moved forward, but something in her survival instincts told her to remain as silent as possible. She shuffled forward to the end of the tunnel and eventually saw that the tunnel turned a corner and opened into a larger atrium. She peeked from around the corner and saw that the light source was another flashlight, but this time it was in Matt's hands. However, Matt's lifeless body was on the ground, and sitting on him was a naked human-like creature. The creature was crouched like Gollum on Matt's collapsed ribcage, and the creature was holding Matt's decapitated head. The creature was speaking into Matt's ear, and then turning Matt's head, putting the mouth up against the creature's ear, expecting Matt to respond. The creature was speaking, but it wasn't English. Clara could feel ice shoot throughout her entire body, and warm tears began to well in her eyes as the creature stood up to an unnatural height, revealing a gaunt physique. The side profile of the creature revealed, despite looking human, its face lacking ears or a nose. Clara began to backpedal, without taking her eyes off the creature. "Please don't notice me," she thought to herself. The creature then proceeded to drag Matt's lifeless body by the ankle with one hand and carried his head by the hair in the other. The creature dragged his body to the dark corner of the atrium, out of her sight. Clara faced the creature and backed as far as she could before being out of earshot of that thing. She then turned to begin walking and turned on her flashlight. At the end of the tunnel, she saw a figure walking in her direction. It was only for a brief second, but she immediately turned off her light. Whatever was at the end of the tunnel must have seen her, as a shuffling noise could be heard walking towards her. To her surprise, the figure then turned on a flashlight and called out to her. "Clara, is that you?" Jason said down the tunnel. Clara felt a wave of relief as she turned on her flashlight and sprinted to Jason. "Jason, we have to leave," Clara said while trying not to cry. "There's something down here with us. It killed Matt," she said, letting her emotions get the better of her. Jason stood puzzled and confused. "Matt's dead? I just saw him a couple of minutes ago. There's no way." "You need to trust me. We need to leave now." Jason looked concerned and unsure of what to do. "Do you still have the keys to the maintenance door? We need to get them and get out of here." Jason put down his backpack and fished around for the keys, pulling out the key ring, and handed it to Clara. Before the two began their way back to the entrance of the tunnel, they heard a voice coming from the atrium. "Jason, Clara," something said. Jason and Clara shared a confused look, and Jason began to laugh. That was messed up. You really had me going. Clara had a look of terror as she began to plead with Jason to leave with her. Jason began walking towards the direction of the voice, but Clara tried to stop him. Jason, that isn't Matt. I saw Matt without his head. Something killed him. Matt slowly began to enter the field of vision of James' flashlight. The figure very much looked like Matt, but he sounded much different than what he normally did. His voice was raspy and diluted, as if something was wrong with his lungs. Clara's fight or flight kicked in and left Jason in the tunnel. The creature knew immediately that it had been discovered and rushed Jason while screeching. The screams of Jason filled the tunnel as he began to be attacked by that thing that killed Matt. But that wasn't all. More screeches could be heard in other tunnels, indicating that there were more of these things down here. Clara grabbed on tightly to the keyring as she finally made it out of the tunnel and back to the set of old wooden stairs. She sprinted up the stairs 2 at a time as the screams got closer. She ascended the stairs and finally reached the top and tried finding the key which opened the door. She tried her best to fish around the dozen of keys that were on the ring, but none seemed to work. She could hear more of those things coming closer in the tunnel. With only luck to guide her, she placed one of the keys into the door and twisted it. The door lock opened and she pushed open the door. Waiting for her on the other side was a security guard and the principal. The guard was holding a gun and the principal shined a flashlight in her face. Well, 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 Miss Clara. Looks like curiosity got the better of you, Principal Hayward said with a slight hint of disappointment. Clara tried to push past them to get to safety, but the guard took her keys and pushed her back into the stairwell. Oh, no, sweetie. You and your friends wanted to investigate so badly, so now you have to deal with what you found. The security guard then shot her in the stomach, causing her to fall down a few of the stairs. The creatures then swarmed her as the guard closed the door and locked it. When I was 10 or 12, I lived with my mother. We were below poverty level poor. We lived up in the mountains around Santa Cruz, California. My mother had a friend that owned a large bit of property up there, and he'd let us stay up in a trailer. Our trailer was very small and was right beside a garden. A chain link fence ran around the garden to keep the dog the owner had out, along with other animals. Deer and other things were very common in the area. Also inside the fence area was a single room. It was built like a tiny house, but it was only a single room on the inside. The room had electricity, and since our actual trailer didn't, I spent a lot of my time out there. I was super into video games. There was one thing you should know right now. This small fenced-in area was the only part of the property, but most of it was heavily forested. Also, I refused to leave the fenced area, because the owner's dog had been mistreated by children in the past, and was very sketchy towards me at all times. If I was ever alone, it would bite at me, even through the fence. The fence was tall, at least 7 feet high, and wasn't movable though. So as long as the gate was closed, I was safe. That said, tiny bit of the property. There was no one else around for miles and miles. Now I tell you all this because I think it's important you understand what kind of scene this was before I really get into the story. We have a fenced-in location that seems fairly safe. It contains a trailer and a single room with power that is not connected to the trailer. Nothing else for miles. My mom's van is parked out front of the gate to the fenced-in area, and a single unpaved road runs from this garden for about a mile to the main house. Now then, I brought friends up there to sleep over here and there. We all thought it was pretty cool, you know? Like camping out, sort of. Besides, we would get our own room to stay in, to play video games all night. It was like a dream come true. The downside was simple. When it got dark out, it really got dark out. No city around, and the trailer would not be lit up at all. There was no bathroom to use in the room, and you'd have to walk through the dark garden in order to get to the trailer to use it. Odd things happened out here from time to time. It was always something that could be somewhat easily explained away, though. Noises like people working at night sometimes. Or once, me and my friend were sitting out in the garden, and we saw a shadow as big as a small bear bound up a tree. But the tree didn't shake like there was weight on it. The dog also creeped me out, but, angry dog. I was a kid. It happens. Now, I am a scaredy cat. I've always have been. I have trouble walking through a lit house if I'm alone at all. My friends, however, tend to be more outgoing. Just the kinds of people I get along with. This time I had a friend over. His name was Jacob. We were staying up all night and playing Sonic the Hedgehog 3 and Knuckles on my Sega Genesis on a ratty old television. We started playing as the sun went down, and by the time we were finishing up the game, it was about 2 a.m. That's when we heard it. We turned off the game getting ready to find something else to play. There was a rumbling in the woods behind the room we were in, like somebody was rolling something heavy around. We hadn't heard it before, because the noise we were playing from was loud. Immediately, I got goosebumps. Jacob was not really worried about it, but it's not like there was someone else's house or yard over there. It was a forest for miles, and it sounded like someone was constructing something, dragging or rolling something really big. Eventually, Jacob convinced me to play some more games. I agreed on the condition that we turn the volume down so we could hear everything if something happened. We started playing and I didn't even notice the noise stop because I was getting engrossed. A couple of hours later, Jacob said he had used the bathroom. I was feeling fine by then, so I was fine he left the trailer to go to the bathroom. He was taking a while, so I eventually decided that I'd go check up on him. Besides, I could use the bathroom and grab a snack anyways. I opened the door to leave, and he was just standing there at the doorway, right outside the door, facing it. It scared the crap out of me. I asked him what he was doing just standing there, blocking the exit. I realized he must have sneaked up to the door because I could hear him walk away from the room, but I hadn't heard him walk back to it. It was super quiet out there without the noises of the city. I should have been able to hear him. He refused to say anything or respond. He just stood there. I told him he was really creeping me out, but it was not unlike him to try to scare me like this. Finally, I decided just to go to the trailer and use the bathroom myself, partially because I knew my mother was asleep in there. I told him what I was doing, then moved past him. When I pushed him out of my way a little, his skin felt freezing to the touch. I jumped a little, but it was a cold night and he had been standing out there for like 30 minutes, so I figured that was to be expected. I walked as quickly as I could over to the trailer. He followed me, like right on my tail. It was unnerving. I joked a little, saying that he'd already surprised me by scaring me at the door. The joke is already over. Finally, I got to the trailer and walked in. He didn't follow, just stayed at the doorway. I checked on my mom, who was fast asleep, then turned to go to the bathroom. Now, it being a porta potty, we kept the bathroom door shut because it smelled bad. When I reached for the door and tried to open it, it was locked. A nervous voice came from behind the door. I'm in here." I quickly turned to look at Jacob, but the door was still open, and there was nothing there but the pitch black night. I freeze in terror. I would have heard the bathroom door open if he came in behind me and gone that way. There is no way to do it quietly. It creaks. I yelped so loud that it woke up my mother. I stared at the doorway, unable to bring myself to move a muscle. She got up, walked over there, and looked out. Not seeing anything, she closed the door and asked me what was wrong. By now, Jacob was coming out of the bathroom and acting perfectly normal, but a bit confused. I explained what had happened. Jacob said he was just taking a long time in the bathroom, basically. Neither of them believing me at all, no matter how much I insisted. My mom is sure that I just got sleepy and imagined it. Jacob thought I was trying to prank him. So my mom gets out this big flashlight and walks us back to the room. She tells us to go to sleep, then leaves and goes back to bed herself. Now, this room doesn't have any windows or anything, so after a while I calm back down a little. I'm telling myself that my mom was right. I must have had like a waking dream or something. Jacob insists that he was in the bathroom the whole time, and I'm inclined to believe him. because there's just no way to really get around without being heard. So I settle down. I'm a little rattled, but I'm thinking I can just sleep it off through the night. Suddenly, the dog starts going nuts, right behind us. The room is up against the fence, so the dog just must have been right there on the other side. I felt like I jumped so high I was surprised I didn't hit the roof. Jacob's laughing at me like, "Ha, a dog's barking at a squirrel and you're losing it?" It keeps going on like that for some time. Suddenly the barking stops and gets replaced by whimpering. We hear the dog run away. There's about 45 seconds of silence before we hear something new. A small scratching sound on the back wall of the room. We both try to be as silent as we can. Eventually, it stops. After 5 or so minutes of silence, Jacob decides to be brave. He insists that he's going out to get my mother, telling her something crazy is going on and we need to get out of here. I wish he wouldn't leave me alone, but there is no way I'm going out there. Never. He arms himself the best he can. The only thing that we had with us in the room would be a tennis racket. Then he takes a couple deep breaths and opens the door and dashes out. I close it as quickly as I can behind him. In less than 30 seconds, I can hear a scream. Not long after the door flies open and he comes back in looking as pale as a ghost. He's breathing like he just ran a marathon. His eyes look like big dinner plates. I ask him what's going on 4 times before he can finally start getting words out. He tells me that he walks out there and as he's walking through the garden as quick as he could, he saw my mom. Just standing there. He tried to talk to her, but she just stares at him with a blank expression. Getting super creeped out because of what had happened earlier, he takes a couple more steps towards her, telling her that he thought something was in the woods. Suddenly, her face turns to an awkward smile. Then he realizes something terrible. He hadn't noticed sooner because of the darkness and because of how much he had been in a hurry. She was on the other side of the fence. Now, the door to this room does not lock. And as I explained earlier, this room had no windows. He had been trying to move stuff in front of the door as he told this story, and by the end of it, I was trying to help him. In retrospect, whatever had been harassing us seemed to be adverse to actually entering the room or the trailer. Because the Jacob one didn't want to come in either time he could have, and this room was not sturdy. Either way, we stacked everything we could against the door, thinking somehow like in the cartoons this would totally keep the creature out. For the rest of the night we heard scratching coming from all around the room. I cried. Jacob looked like his mind had left his body with fear. At one time I thought I heard it speak. I heard from right next to where I was resting against the wall, and my mother's voice quietly. The same exact phrasing and intonation she had been using earlier in the night. "What's wrong?" Followed by, "Go to sleep." The sun must have come up eventually. The scratching eventually stopped. We heard my mom come to get us, and this time actually hearing footsteps. We absolutely refused to leave the room. My mom had to go get the property owner and have him take the door off. When we saw that it was actually her, I bursted into tears again. We never had any experiences like this again, and eventually moved away. But that night still haunts me. I still refuse to go out unless I'm with a bunch of people, and I will never, ever live in the woods again. So my parents used to be big outdoor buffs. My father's an ex-champion hobby boat racer, and my mom was an Alabama-raised country girl. So they always wanted to camp and go sailing and fishing and stuff when I was little. They went on a trip with some friends when I was about 10, and since then, they have refused to go camping anymore. My dad told me this story sometime after I turned 18. It still makes me wonder, considering the following. My parents moved around a lot, and only had one set of friends they really kept in touch with all the time. Danny and Lisa. Danny and Lisa weren't outdoor nuts like my parents were, but they were friends and it was fun to go camping with your friends, right? So they all planned like a 5-day trip to a lake south of where we lived, with a creek that was on Danny's father's property. so they could camp on the property and fish all they wanted, then go to the lake with ease. They all left everything from now, and the story is from my father's account. He told me this once and only once, and got drunk after he told me, which is extremely uncharacteristic of him anymore. The first 2 days were normal, just camping, drinking, sharing stories while fishing and boating and water skiing heaven. It was just young adults and parents having fun. The second night, all night, everyone kept hearing weird yelps and barks, like 2 dogs were fighting, but were both just hurt and yelping the whole time. They figured a coyote and slept. The next day, they continued on their adventures. That night, they kept hearing those noises, but they were extremely close to camp, so my father and Danny went to go see if they could scare them off, while my mom and Lisa stayed behind because they were scared. Anyways, my dad and Danny went to go look for these fighting coyotes, searching for them by the sound. My dad had a shotgun and Danny had a machete. They were hoping to scare the coyotes or whatever they were with a gunshot. They got to a clearing and could hear the noises extremely loud, but it seemed to be coming from multiple directions, as if the sound were distant from each other. Now, my dad is a bit of a goof. He swears he saw Bigfoot at 14, but this is different. He told Danny just to go back. No questions, no explanation. Just, Danny, we need to go back. So they did. But the sounds didn't fade away this time. Danny nervously asked my dad what was going on, and my dad wouldn't tell him. Just kept shushing Danny. Danny was also a bit of a goofball, hence I always liked my Uncle Danny. So he thought my dad was getting him back for a prank. He kept nudging my dad and trying to get him to say, "Gotcha," but my dad never untensed. Finally, they got close to the creek and away from the camp, and my dad told Danny to run, fast. Then my dad took off, no remorse. Danny apparently followed but tripped and called for my dad, but my dad refused to go back to help him, even though Danny started calling for help. Danny was yelling that his leg was broken, it hurt, etc., but my dad just kept running. Then my dad, my mom, and Lisa say they all heard what sounded like a really, really, really loud cougar growl. It made my dad's ears ring. After that, Danny stopped screaming for help. My dad got back to camp and the ladies asked what was going on, but my dad just said that there was something out there. My mom, being the practical woman she is, said, "Well, no crap. What was it?" My dad wouldn't answer. Lisa is freaking out and asking where Danny is, but my dad just keeps saying that he'll be here in a second. A few hours pass by and the ladies are extremely worried about Danny, while my dad apparently would cringe when they would say something. Finally, from the opposite side from where my dad arrived, comes Danny, walking just fine up to the camp, wordlessly. My dad cocks his rifle, but waved it away as a survival readiness, something my mom says she'll never forget, because that's what tipped her off, that something was wrong with Danny. First, he walked up and nudged his way next to my mother, but after getting weird looks and the death glare from my father, he moved closer to Lisa, who had been nagging him for 10 minutes. But he would either grunt yes or no or would just stare into the fire. My dad finally asked Danny what had happened to his leg, and Danny looked all confused. My dad told him, "I thought you said your leg was broken." Danny looked at him and replied, "Broken." Then, as if on cue, he starts yelling, "Steve, oh, my leg, oh, I think it's broken." The ladies grabbed med kits and first aid and water and were rationalizing that it was him just going into shock. But upon him getting his pants off with much difficulty, he refused to get any help, and actually would make it harder for them to remove anything. There was obviously no break, no blood, just bruises all up and down his sides. Lisa just kept asking what had happened, but he would just grunt or wave her hands away from the bruises. My dad said, "He's fine, let's just sleep." My mom gave him the "Are you kidding me?" look, and he gave her the "Do it now." And so she complied and they went to their tent. They said they heard Lisa nagging and one side arguing with Danny because he would just never reply. And so finally she yelled that she was going to go pee. Danny asked if he could come with her since there were animals out there, and not so many words. She said okay and they left. My dad woke up about 10ish in the morning and started making breakfast. Danny and Lisa were gone. My mom asked him where they had been, but my dad wouldn't reply. After a little while, they both came back, rather unceremoniously and without word. They weren't holding hands or in each other's arms or anything. They were just being awkward. They refused food and Danny would randomly yell out, "My leg!" And Lisa would keep complaining about feeling ill. My mom suggested that they go home or call off the trip on account of Danny's leg. The two nodded. My father just kind of watched. They all agreed, so Danny and Lisa got into my parents' car, not theirs, and just waited. Didn't pick up any of their tents or their food or coolers or anything. My mom came over and asked if they were going to grab any of their things, and they just shook their heads. My dad asked, "Why don't you take your car?" And they both just said, "Broken." Just like Danny had said last night, in a creepy, practiced way. My dad sighed and packed up the car and drove off. Danny and Lisa stayed quiet the entire way, except for their random mumblings to each other, completely indecipherable. My parents took them home and came and got me, and we could all tell that something was wrong, despite coming back days early. They said that Danny got hurt, so they had to come home. Now this part on is from me, after they all got home. I asked if we could go see them, but my dad replied no, a little too quickly, and I thought that he was mad at me, so I left to go play PlayStation. I remember because I missed them, and he was being so mean. So I snuck back upstairs and listened from the stairwell, and overheard my parents saying to my grandparents, talking about something that wasn't right. It was like those stories. Yada yada yada. I assumed that they were talking about some random person and got bored and went and played some more PlayStation. A few weeks later, I asked about Uncle Danny, and my dad said that we're not going to see them anymore. I was mad, and so I demanded to know why. He told me something about his dad being sick, and so I was sad. Then I forgot about it, and life went on. Fast forward 5 years. I am at a supermarket where I used to live, where all this happened. It is also where Danny and Lisa lived, only that on the other side of the road. Being 10, I was never allowed to go over, but now that I can drive, I decide to go over to my old house, and even see Danny and Lisa. I am driving slowly and rather creepishly down my old street, when I spot Danny walking down the street. I'm excited and I flag him down. I pull over and get out to talk to him. He seems kind of stiff to me, kind of robotic, in a way. He felt like he was trying to smother me. I asked him how he'd been doing, and he said alright. I asked him where Lisa was, and he said at home. So I asked if I could see her, and he agreed. I walked with him and asked him about all kinds of things, people and all this stuff, trying to catch up. But he didn't remember, or didn't care about 90% of it, which seemed kind of odd. Danny was always awesome and involved. So I now decide to ask him a couple of obvious trick questions, which he failed miserably, and now I'm a bit nervous. We get to his door and opened it. The smell of a freaking meat locker pours out. It's completely horrid and incomparable smell that just assaults my nostrils. The place is a wreck. Crap is everywhere. Everything is coated in dust and crap, and just looks like nothing has ever been cleaned. Laundry is everywhere. No lights are really on. It's a mess. I'm more than a little freaked out, and I asked him what had happened here, and he grunts, a really weird, almost guttural grunt. So I ask about Lisa, and she yells from the kitchen, what was just behind a wall facing the room I was in. It wasn't a full wall, just the wall with the top missing, not touching the ceiling, so I could smell and hear something cooking. I walk into the kitchen expecting to see Lisa making some normal food and planning on asking Lisa why Danny was acting all weird, but what I saw was unforgettable. She was standing in the kitchen, naked, completely covered in blood, cooking some kind of mangled mess, surrounded by thousands of bones. I was just smart enough to notice a pile of freaking dog collars in the corner. I yelled and Danny lunged at me. I kind of sidestepped away from him clumsily and ran out the door. Danny gave chase and I got in my car and noped out of there as fast as I could go. I got home and called the police, gave them the address, and went straight to my dad. He punched me in the face and told me he overheard the address. I tried to apologize and he yelled at me, so I yelled at him for lying to me. So he hit me again, then hugged me and said that he was sorry. I tried to ask him, but he rather strongly told me to shut up. The police came to my house and told me that they didn't find anyone living there. But the story did match up with what was going on. They told me that they suspected that the previous owners had left, and a mixture of wild animals and burglaring homeless people had been living there. My dad, being the freaking genius that he is, asked why the house hadn't been foreclosed or bill payments hadn't been an issue. The cops stammered and said that they'd look into it. Apparently Danny's father had still been paying for all of it. I still haven't seen them since, and my dad only once told me the story beforehand. My meeting with them was pure coincidence, and only made the story worse. A couple of years after all that had happened, my dad told me this story, got drunk, and in his drunken stupor that night told me that he knew that what had happened to Danny. He knew what they were. Better him than my dad.
We've never spoken about this particular event, not even amongst ourselves, or after it happened anyway. My friend Ben, Ryan, and myself, we were all going camping in the woods, just like we used to when we got a weekend off. Or at least used to, before this. In general, we try to go to new places. There was this one forest in particular, situated about 2 hours away from our city, that we'd been told about. We had been putting it off for a while because it was said to be dangerous and packed with wild animals that would attack campers often. Ben, in his usual parts of trying to be a badass, said he'd take his shotgun and that we'd be safe. Ryan was a bit of a wimp, but he agreed. So we drove there as soon as we had a free weekend. We got there by mid-afternoon. After we set up camp and the night was beginning to set in, we decided to go for a walk. We secured our stuff and took his shotgun, in case any animals approached us, and we started following a small path and got deeper into the woods. Walks in the dark like these would always relax me, but this time I was starting to feel uneasy, like something was off, and after about a half an hour of walking, we started to hear noises getting closer to us. They sounded like footsteps of several big creatures closing in on us, but to this day I swear that I could also hear soft whispers beneath the noises. Feeling like a cornered animal, in total panic, we began running back towards the path that we had come from. During this, I somehow lost Ben and Ryan, and could not even see their flashlights in the distance. I kept running, scared shitless. At some point, I ran past an old house, which seemed to have been suffered by a fire. The windows were boarded up, and the door seemed half open. Suddenly, I heard something coming from inside. Terrified at first, I froze, but then I realized it was actually Ryan, calling for me to come inside. I was doubtful at first for some reason, but as soon as I heard the animal sounds coming closer to me, I bolted into the house and closed the door. I lifted my flashlight to look around, but there was Ryan. I pointed the lights to his eyes, but he didn't seem to react much to it. In fact, he seemed really calm, which was odd for him. "Let's stay here for now," he said in a relaxed tone of voice. "Those things out there could be dangerous." Now, I was worried about Ben, but remembered that, worst case scenario, he did have his shotgun ready if anything attacked him. I took a deep breath and started looking around the room. The few chairs that were lying on the floor looked charred, and in one corner of the room, there was a pile of sticks with a bunch of stones scattered around them. All of a sudden, we heard Ben's gun go off twice. I stood there paralyzed. Every sound in the forest stopped. I glanced briefly at Ryan, and he was just looking at me, completely quiet. I was about to say something when suddenly someone started banging on the door. Ryan immediately grabbed my shoulder and said, "Don't open the door. It could be one of those things." I started walking towards the door, and he insisted, "Don't do it. They are going to kill us." This really unsettled me, but I was afraid it could be Ben. What if he had just shot one of those wild animals and was looking for shelter? I grabbed on the metal door handle, took a deep breath, and as Ryan was still talking behind me, I opened the door. A cold chill ran down my spine. Standing there, in front of me, was Ryan. It didn't sink in at first, as he was saying, "Hey man, did you hear Ben's going to go off too? I think we need to find him and get the hell out of here." I babbled something incomprehensible and slowly turned around, pointing my flashlight all around the room. But nobody was there. And when the light reached the corner of the room, I realized what I had been looking at earlier. It was a pile of bones, and around them, forming a circle, were a bunch of human skulls. We ran as fast as we could and found Ben near the campsite. When he saw us, he became pale and didn't say a word. We got in my truck and drove the hell away from there, leaving our shit behind. On our way back, after a long silence, I asked Ben what he had shot at. Some things came from behind the trees and attacked me, and I shot him down. Ben, what were those things? It was you guys. I killed both of you back there. The rest of the way back, nobody spoke a word, and we never saw Ben again. Back in 2012, we always had bonfires every night. I'm in the Marine Corps Reserve, so while I'm on home, I work as an Ohio State trooper. Anyway, a bunch of buddies and I were having a bonfire. We got everyone at my house around 7 and then loaded them up into our vehicles. One was a Chevy Suburban, a Jeep Wrangler, and a Ford 350. The spot where we had our bonfire was a mile back up on land. There was this dirt path that would take us down to the cabin. It starts out as going down in between 2 fields, then through the woods, and then dead ends to our cabin, which overlooks a creek that eventually dumps into the Scioto River. We had about 24 people packed into 3 vehicles, and shit, the Suburban is mine. So we went off, and driving through the woods wasn't the biggest of deals, but as soon as we got to the area, I stepped out of my vehicle and could smell this god-awful smell. Death. It smelled like death. Like an animal of some sort was rotting in the woods somewhere. Everyone else said that they could smell it too. I didn't think much of it. Maybe a dead deer or something like that, or that someone had shot and couldn't find. It was the end of September, so hunting season had started. So, anyways, I get to starting a fire and didn't think much of the smell. We all eventually got used to it. We played beer pong and had a generator going to power the cabin. So, a friend of mine, Ryan, had been telling me that this girl that I brought had been asking him all sorts of shit about me, but also was saying how much of a gentleman I was. So I knew that night I was going to get laid. Fuck yeah. Anyway, the fire was dying down, so Ryan was going to the woods with a few of my buddies to get some more. We had them take a radio with them just in case they needed help. The fire started to get real low, and it had been about 30 minutes since they left. "Hey, where the fuck are you guys at?" I asked over the radio. "Dude, chill. I'm on my way," Ryan responded. They came back later with a fuck ton of wood. Got the fire going again, and eventually it started to get late. People wanted to start going home, so after everyone left, there was about 8 of us remaining. the girl I liked, Sarah, Ryan, David, and another guy and 3 other girls. The other guy and the girls were all wasted as fuck and were pretty much just flirting with one another. I continued to chill by the fire with Sarah and Ryan as we talked about random shit. And so, as it started to get later and later, around 2 a.m. is when the 3 girls, David and the other guy, went to lay down in the cabin. Sarah and I stayed outside and talked for a while. Eventually, we started making out. I stopped when I heard this cracking sound outside. I looked over and couldn't make out what the figure was that was walking around near the tree line. "Hey you! What are you doing over there?" I asked. "Dude, chill. I'm on my way," the figure responded. It sounded just like Ryan, but I swore Ryan had been in the cabin. Maybe he had walked out when I was occupied, but it didn't make sense. "What?" I asked. "Dude, chill. I'm on my way," it responded again. My hair started to raise on the back of my neck. "The fuck?" Sarah responded. "Sarah, go inside and wake everyone up," I responded, and she didn't hesitate. I walked over to my SUV and popped the trunk and grabbed my AR-15. For some reason, I was shaking, and the death smell came back. "What the hell?" I whispered to myself as I shoved the mag into the rifle and sent it around into the chamber. I walked around the SUV to where I saw the figure in the woods and couldn't see it anymore. About this time, Ryan walked out of the cabin and looked at me like I was fucking stupid. "Dude, why do you have a gun?" he asked. We're out in the woods in the middle of nowhere," I told him. And then he told me that I should have just woken him up and that I had no idea what I was talking about. I told him to take everyone back to their cars and come back with a gun. He eventually did as I asked and got everyone into the SUV and they drove off. I sat there by the fire for a while, looking around me. I had a spotlight by my side and 1 million kilowatt power ones. I couldn't help but think if there was someone playing a trick on me, but living 8 miles away from a prison, you really can't be too sure. The death smell was starting to get almost repugnant. I felt like I was almost gagging, and I heard something walking off through the woods again. I grabbed the spotlight and stood up. I waited for a moment, and then I saw it again. The figure walking out of the woods and standing there looking at me. I flipped on the light. "Hey, I got a fucking gun. You want to tell me who the fuck you are before I lay your ass out right now?" Not a single word came out of the person's mouth. "Motherfucker." I started to walk closer. "Dude, why do you have a gun?" the person asked. "Because I stopped mid-sentence, and I started to think about what it said and what Ryan said. It was mimicking him. It repeated it again. This time, it sounded just like Ryan. I raised the rifle and had a spot on the guy. "Ryan?" I asked. Its neck shifted a bit, then twitching its whole body, it looked unnatural. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but something about this man looked wrong. I heard music playing in the background, and I could see headlights coming in through the woods. "Who are you?" I asked. The figure turned around and looked at me. Its facial features were off. It looked like the other guy that was Ryan, but its voice sounded just like Ryan's, and it stared at me with its mouth gaped open. "Who the fuck are you?" I shouted, flipping my rifle off safe. Something in the fire snapped, and so I flipped around to see what the hell it was, and the person that was standing behind me, or whatever it was gone. "Fuck," I shouted, looking around for him. About this time, Ryan was parking the Suburban and getting out and putting a pistol in his back waistband. "Dude, what's going on?" he asked. I started to fill him in on everything, then asked him if he had taken care of everybody. He told me that everyone was in the cabin and with the SUV, the other guy, Sarah, and the 3 girls. We sat by the fire and started to wait, and then the death smell had went away for the time being. At this point, it was around 4 a.m., and the sunlight was starting to come in around the wee hours. And then the death smell started to come back, this time even stronger, to the point that Ryan and I started to gag and kind of throw up. I got up and looked around and waited to see the figures again. A few moments passed when I could see something on the ground coming out of the woods. I turned on my spotlight and shined it at the figure, the man who I had seen before, who was now on the ground rolling around. "What the fuck is that?" Ryan asked, pulling his pistol out. And we both started to stare at the man rolling around on the ground for a good 20 minutes. And then it just stopped, laying there. The fire outside illuminated the figure through the window on the door. I could see it there, twitching. Sunrise starting to come in. I could see the figure walking around from the cabin. I ran up and opened the door and walked outside. And by this time, the sun was starting to come out, but it was hard to see anything outside except for the man. The man was walking towards the woods, twitching and shaking. "Hey!" I shouted, drawing my rifle on the man. And the figure stopped, looked at me, and I fired a round straight into its head. I seen the man drop like a rock on the ground and started twitching. "Fuck you!" I shouted and kept a bead on him, walking towards the twitching, and then it stopped. What happened next, I couldn't explain. The man just stood up and started walking towards the woods like nothing had happened. I lowered my rifle and watched as the man walked into the tree line, turned around, and looked at us. I didn't see any wound on him, nothing. His face was completely untouched. And then the death smell went away, and I couldn't smell anything anymore. The man smiled at us and walked into the woods again. But this time we ran to the SUV, got in, and got the fuck out of Dodge. We never spoke of what happened to anyone in fear that... We never spoke about this to anyone in fear that they might think that we were mental. I've been back to that place countless times now, but I can't seem to find the death smell or see anything unusual anymore. I'm not sure if this was a goat man or skinwalker or ghost thing. Whatever it was, though, it's moved on to somewhere else, and wherever that is, who knows?